Welcome, friend, to this tranquil space where we journey back through the mists of time, seeking whispers from a world both ancient and intimately human. Tonight, our voyage takes us to a civilization of unparalleled grandeur, a land of golden sands and monumental aspirations, ancient Egypt. Whether you're settling in for the evening or simply curious to explore the profound mysteries of the past, I'm deeply grateful for your presence. I'm always fascinated to know where you are tuning in from, perhaps a bustling metropolis or a quiet village, and the hour at which you join this shared moment. It is truly remarkable how the echoes of history can forge connections across vast distances. If this particular style of calm, contemplative historical exploration resonates with you, do consider subscribing, as we have many more stories to unfold beneath the silent stars. This isn't merely an academic exercise, it's an invitation to confront one of humanity's oldest and most universal experiences, death. But for the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending. It was merely a doorway, a perilous yet promising transition to a glorious, eternal existence. What I am about to reveal will reshape everything you thought you knew about how an entire civilization faced its ultimate reckoning. These weren't simply people burying their dead. They were master alchemists, architects, and spiritual cartographers systematically preparing for an immortal journey with an obsession and ingenuity that continue to astound us today. Today, I'm going to take you inside the intricate world of ancient Egyptian death practices. You'll discover the meticulous rituals, the profound beliefs, and the chilling sacrifices that define their passage to the afterlife. We will explore how every aspect of their lives was intertwined with the inevitability of death, and how their relentless pursuit of immortality left an indelible mark not only on their civilization, but on the very fabric of human history. By the end of this journey, you'll see the shifting sands of ancient Egypt in an entirely new and perhaps unsettling light. But before we step into the ceremonial chambers and shadowed tombs, let us first paint a picture of the cosmic framework that made such an elaborate relationship with death not just possible, but absolutely essential. Before we can truly grasp what death was like for the ancient Egyptians, we must first immerse ourselves in the very philosophical bedrock upon which their entire civilization was built, the concept of Ma'at. Imagine, if you will, a vast, complex tapestry intricately woven with threads of order, justice, truth, and cosmic balance. This, dear listener, was Ma'at, not merely a goddess, but a fundamental principle, an invisible yet omnipresent force that governed the universe from the smallest grain of sand to the majestic sweep of the celestial bodies. Every sunrise, every seasonal flood of the Nile, every heartbeat, all were manifestations of Ma'at. To the ancient Egyptians, the world was a delicate equilibrium, constantly threatened by the primordial forces of Isfet, or chaos. It was the sacred duty of the pharaoh, and indeed of every individual, to uphold Ma'at, to contribute to the harmonious flow of existence, and to resist the encroaching darkness. This wasn't abstract theology. It was the practical guide for daily life, dictating moral conduct, social structure, and, most profoundly, their understanding of death. For a people so intimately connected to the cycles of nature, the predictable rising and setting of the sun, the annual life-giving inundation of the Nile, the constant renewal of vegetation, it was inconceivable that death could be a final cessation. How could the sun die each evening only to be reborn each morning, and humanity not share in this divine rhythm? How could the parched earth spring forth with verdant life after the Nile's retreat, and the human spirit not experience a similar resurgence? Death, therefore, was not an ending, but a transformation, a perilous journey from one state of being to another, ultimately leading to a renewed and eternal existence. This deeply ingrained belief in cyclical existence meant that preparing for death was not morbid, but utterly pragmatic. a lifelong endeavor as important as securing a good harvest or building a sturdy home. It was an investment in forever, a meticulous undertaking designed to ensure one's continued participation in the grand cosmic dance of Ma'at. The pantheon of Egyptian gods and goddesses played crucial roles in this eternal drama, each figure a thread in the intricate tapestry of death and rebirth. Foremost among them was Osiris, the beloved god of the underworld, vegetation, and rebirth. His myth, the first great story of resurrection, provided the blueprint for every Egyptian's hoped-for afterlife. Murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother Set, only to be lovingly reassembled and brought back to a symbolic life by his devoted wife Isis and sister Nephthys, Osiris became the archetype for the justified dead. He ruled Duat, the underworld, and it was before his solemn gaze that every soul would one day be judged. You see, Osiris wasn't just a deity. He was the eternal promise that death could be overcome, that fragmentation could be healed, and that new life awaited those who lived in accordance with Ma'at. His son Horus, the falcon-headed god, avenged his father and became the living embodiment of the pharaoh on earth, further cementing the link between divine kingship and the cyclical nature of existence. Then there was Anubis, the jackal-headed god, the divine embalmer and guardian of tombs. His presence was ubiquitous in funerary art, a constant reminder of the meticulous process required to prepare the body for eternity. He presided over the weighing of the heart, ensuring that Ma'at's delicate balance was upheld. Anubis was not a harbinger of fear, but a benevolent guide, whose sacred touch initiated the transformation of the deceased into an Akh, a transfigured and effective spirit capable of navigating the perils of the underworld. Imagine the profound comfort this belief must have offered, a divine protector overseeing every step of the transition, ensuring that the earthly vessel was preserved and the spiritual journey secured. And of course, Re, the powerful sun god, whose daily voyage across the sky and nocturnal passage through the underworld provided the ultimate metaphor for death and rebirth. The pharaoh, in particular, was believed to join Re in his solar barge, journeying through the hours of night, battling serpents and demons, only to rise triumphant with the sun each morning. This cosmic journey undertaken by the king ensured the continued vitality of Egypt itself. This deep integration of death into the cosmic order meant that there was no sharp, agonizing division between life and death as we often conceive it today. Instead, there was a continuous flow, a grand continuum of existence where the boundaries were permeable. The living had obligations to the dead, and the dead, if properly propitiated, could offer blessings or warnings to the living. This wasn't merely ancestor worship. It was an ongoing relationship, a vital connection that reinforced the community of both the living and the departed. Funerary practices, therefore, weren't simply about disposing of a corpse. They were about facilitating this continuous relationship, ensuring the deceased's comfort, power, and ability to interact with the realms beyond. Every ritual, every amulet, every inscription was designed to reinforce Ma'at, to push back against Isfet, and to affirm the enduring hope of eternal life. The earliest Egyptians, long before the monumental pyramids, expressed these beliefs in simpler ways. Pre-dynastic burials often involved placing the deceased in fetal positions, surrounded by simple grave goods, in shallow pits in the desert sand. The dry heat naturally desiccated the bodies, preserving them in a rudimentary form that may have inspired later, more elaborate mummification techniques. Even at this early stage, the intent was clear: to protect the body, to provide for the departed, and to facilitate their passage. These simple acts laid the foundation for the complex tapestry of death rituals that would evolve over 3 millennia, all woven with the same fundamental threads of Ma'at, rebirth, and the profound interconnectedness of life and death. The cosmic order, you see, was not a distant, abstract concept. It was the very air they breathed, the water they drank, and the eternal promise that awaited them all. When the delicate flame of life flickered and extinguished in ancient Egypt, the moment of death itself was not a silent, solitary event, but the dramatic opening act in a profound and meticulously orchestrated journey. Imagine the scene: a humble mud brick home in a village along the fertile Nile, or a grand painted chamber within a nobleman's estate. As the final breath left the body, a hush would fall, quickly broken by a torrent of raw, unrestrained grief. For all their elaborate preparations for the afterlife, the immediate loss of a loved one was still a deeply human tragedy, met with heartfelt sorrow and ritualized expressions of despair. The family members, often women in particular, would typically let out piercing wails, a primal sound of loss that echoed through the narrow streets or palace corridors. This was not merely an outburst. It was a ritualized lamentation, a public declaration of grief that served to alert the community and initiate the intricate funerary process. Often, professional mourners known as wailers or kites would be hired to augment the family's grief, their high-pitched cries and dramatic gestures adding to the solemnity and spectacle of the occasion. These women, often depicted in funerary art with loosened hair and garments, would tear at their clothes, beat their breasts, and smear themselves with mud or dust, embodying the raw anguish of loss. Their role was not to feign emotion, but to channel and externalize the communal grief, ensuring that the deceased was properly lamented and honored. This collective expression of sorrow was deemed vital, believed to aid the deceased's transition, signaling to the gods and spirits of the underworld that a new soul was embarking on its eternal journey, a soul beloved and missed by the living. You see, the departure from the earthly realm was not a quiet drift into oblivion, but a resonant announcement, a spiritual trumpet call signaling a momentous passage. At the very instant of death, Egyptian belief held that the human soul, a complex entity comprising several spiritual components, began its separation from the physical body. The ba, often depicted as a human-headed bird, represented the personality and mobility of the deceased, allowing it to move freely between the tomb and the world of the living. Meanwhile, the K, a spiritual double or life force, remained tethered to the body, requiring sustenance and a physical home, the preserved mummy, to continue its existence. The fear, therefore, was not of the spirit's demise, but of its fragmentation, its inability to reassemble and function effectively in the afterlife. This fundamental belief underscored the absolute necessity of preserving the body, for without it, the K would be homeless, lost, and unable to interact with the world of the dead. Imagine the anxiety this created, a desperate imperative to keep the physical vessel intact, a fragile bridge between two worlds. Immediately following death, practical considerations began. The body would be washed and ritually purified, often with water from the Nile, preparing it for the sacred embalming process. This initial purification was not just for hygiene, but for spiritual cleansing, marking the first step in the transformation from mortal flesh to eternal form. The eyes of the deceased might be closed, the limbs straightened, and the body laid out, often on a reed mat or a simple stretcher, awaiting the arrival of the specialized funerary professionals. For the elite, this transition was swift and seamless, a well-oiled machine springing into action. Priests and embalmers, with their specialized knowledge and tools, would be summoned, initiating the elaborate 70-day mummification process. For the less fortunate, the initial preparations might be simpler, the lamentations perhaps less grand, but the underlying intent remained the same: to honor the deceased and prepare them for their journey. The social aspects of these initial death rituals varied significantly with class, yet shared common threads. For a pharaoh or a high-ranking noble, the dying process itself might be attended by physicians, priests, and close family, perhaps even foreign dignitaries if the ruler was of significant international stature. The palace would enter a period of official mourning, marked by strict protocols, somber attire, and public displays of respect. The news of a pharaoh's death would send ripples of anxiety and solemnity throughout the two lands, as the entire cosmic balance, upheld by the living god-king, was momentarily disrupted. The succession, often a treacherous period of intrigue, would immediately become paramount, even as the elaborate preparations for the deceased king's eternal journey began. For an ordinary peasant, however, death might occur quietly within the family home, attended by loved ones and neighbors. The immediate grief would be profound, but the subsequent rituals, though simplified, still aimed for the same spiritual efficacy. The community would come together, supporting the bereaved, performing communal lamentations, and participating in the preparation of the body. You see, while the scale of resources differed vastly, the deep-seated belief in the journey to the afterlife permeated all levels of Egyptian society, uniting rich and poor in a common purpose to ensure a good death and a blessed eternity. This initial period of intense mourning and immediate physical preparation was crucial. It served not only to process grief and honor the deceased, but also to mentally and spiritually separate the living from the dead, while simultaneously reaffirming their enduring connection. The body, once a vibrant vessel of life, was now recognized as the sacred recipient of transformation, a precious cargo for the journey to Duat. The tearing of clothes, the wailing, the smearing of dust. These were not random acts of hysteria, but deliberate, ritualized expressions serving a profound psychological and spiritual purpose. They were a visceral acknowledgement of the chasm that had opened between this world and the next, while simultaneously a fervent prayer that this chasm would soon be bridged. The air, thick with the scent of spices and tears, would pulse with the anticipation of the next, even more critical phase, the sacred alchemy of mummification, the very crucible of eternal life. The moment of death, therefore, was not an endpoint, but a pivotal crossroads, a dramatic gateway from one existence to another, marking the beginning of the meticulously planned expedition into the unknown. With the last breath exhaled and the initial lamentations echoing, the journey into the afterlife truly began with the sacred, intricate and often disturbing art of mummification. This wasn't merely embalming, it was a profound act of transfiguration, a 70-day odyssey transforming perishable flesh into an eternal vessel, a sacred home for the Ka and a vital anchor for the Ba in the vastness of the cosmos. Imagine, if you will, the house of purification, a designated tent or structure often located near the Nile, where the first, most crucial steps were undertaken. The air would be thick with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, mingled with the faint, metallic tang of blood and the sterile, desiccating scent of natron. This was the domain of the embalmers, not mere technicians, but specialized priests known as the wetu, who performed their duties with reverence, guided by ancient texts and sacred knowledge. The chief embalmer, often wearing a jackal mask to embody Anubis, the god of mummification, would oversee every meticulous step, his voice echoing with ritualistic chants and prayers, transforming a grim task into a divine ceremony. The process commenced with the extraction of the brain, a procedure often carried out through the nostrils with a long, hooked instrument stirring the brain until it liquefied and could be drained. This method, while seemingly crude, reflected a curious disconnect in Egyptian anatomical understanding. They believed the heart to be the seat of intelligence and emotion, while the brain was largely dismissed as insignificant. Imagine the delicate, precise movements required, the grim determination to perform this task without further marring the deceased. Following this, the real work began, the removal of the internal organs. A careful incision was made on the left side of the abdomen, through which the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines were extracted. These vital organs, deemed essential for the deceased's comfort and function in the afterlife, were not discarded. Instead, they underwent a separate, equally meticulous preservation. Each organ was individually dried with natron, anointed with sacred oils, and then carefully placed into canopic jars, 4 distinct vessels, each topped with the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus. Hapi, baboon-headed, for lungs; Duamutef, jackal-headed, for stomach; Kebesenuef, falcon-headed, for intestines; and Imseti, human-headed, for liver. These jars were then placed within the tomb, often near the sarcophagus, ensuring the complete and functional return of the deceased's vital essence. The heart, however, was treated with the utmost reverence. As the seat of intelligence, emotion, and moral judgment, it was almost always left within the body, protected by amulets and spells. For it would be needed in the ultimate test, the weighing of the heart before Osiris. Only the heart would truly bear witness to the deceased's life, lived in accordance with Ma'at. Once the organs were removed, the body cavity was thoroughly cleansed, often with palm wine and spices, and then packed with natron salt, a naturally occurring compound of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate found in the desert. This was the core of the desiccation process, a chemical drying that would remove all moisture from the tissues, preventing decay. The body would be submerged in or covered with vast quantities of natron for approximately 40 days, within a basin designed to allow fluids to drain away. Imagine the sight, a human form slowly shrinking, hardening, transforming under the relentless preservative power of the salt, its former softness replaced by a rigid, almost stone-like quality. The Wetu would carefully monitor the process, their expertise guiding the transformation. After the 40 days of desiccation, the body, now thoroughly dried and shrunken, was retrieved from the natron. It was firm, blackened, and remarkably preserved, yet bore little resemblance to its former living state. This marked the transition to the House of Beauty, where the meticulous work of restoration and wrapping commenced. The desiccated body was carefully cleaned and then treated with a multitude of fragrant oils, resins, and balms such as myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, and beeswax. These anointments softened the skin, filled out the shrunken contours, and most importantly, imbued the body with a divine scent, preparing it for the presence of the gods. The embalmers would meticulously reshape the deceased's features, padding out sunken areas with linen or sawdust, inserting false eyes, and even painting the skin to restore a semblance of lifelike appearance. Every detail was attended to, for the deceased needed to be recognizable by the Ba and Ka to successfully reunite and operate in the afterlife. Then came the intricate, time-consuming process of wrapping. Starting with the fingers and toes, hundreds of yards of fine linen bandages, often specially woven and blessed, were carefully applied in layer upon layer. Each limb, each digit, was wrapped individually before being bound to the main body. Between the layers, a multitude of amulets, symbols of protection, power, and resurrection, were strategically placed. The ankh, symbol of life; the scarab beetle, symbol of renewal; the eye of Horus, protection; the jed pillar, stability, and numerous others, each with its own specific spell and purpose, safeguarded the deceased's journey. As the wrapping progressed, priests would recite incantations and prayers, imbuing each layer with spiritual power, weaving spells of protection and passage into the very fabric of the linen. The outermost layers were often sealed with resin, creating a hard, protective shell that resembled a chrysalis, a final, impenetrable barrier against decay and malevolent forces. The process was not merely practical. It was a magical ritual designed to transform a lifeless body into an Sa, a glorified spiritual body capable of interacting with the divine realm. Variations in mummification existed, dictated largely by social status and wealth. For the pharaohs and the wealthiest nobles, the process was the most elaborate, employing the finest oils, resins, and the most skilled embalmers. Their internals organs would receive gilded coverings, and their amulets would be of solid gold and precious stones. For those of lesser means, the process might be simplified. Less costly oils, perhaps no evisceration, with the body merely flushed with cedar oil or immersed in natron alone. The poorest might receive only a rudimentary burial in the desert sands, relying on natural desiccation. But the fundamental intention remained the same across all strata of society: to preserve the body, to ensure the spiritual components could reunite, and to provide a pathway to eternal life. You see, this sacred alchemy was not a luxury for the privileged few. It was a societal imperative, a testament to a civilization's profound belief that death was not an ending, but a new beginning, meticulously prepared for, painstakingly achieved, and eternally hoped for. The final wrapped mummy, often encased in a series of nested coffins and a sarcophagus, was the ultimate masterpiece of this ancient belief, a silent, powerful monument to the human desire for forever. The mummified body, meticulously prepared for its eternal journey, required a fitting, secure, and spiritually potent home: the tomb. These structures were far more than mere burial places. They were veritable portals to the afterlife, carefully designed conduits between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. Imagine, if you will, the extraordinary evolution of these eternal abodes, an architectural saga spanning millennia, each phase reflecting shifts in belief, technological prowess, and the relentless pursuit of an unassailable immortality. We begin with the earliest forms, the simple, shallow pit graves of the pre-dynastic period, where the deceased, often in a fetal position, were interred directly in the desert sand. The natural desiccation offered by the arid environment provided an accidental form of preservation, perhaps hinting at the more elaborate methods that would follow. These early graves were humble, yet they contained the seeds of later grandeur. The inclusion of modest grave goods, pottery, tools, simple adornments underscored the belief that the departed would need provisions for their journey. The intent, even then, was clear: to protect the body and equip the soul for the vast unknown. As Egyptian society became more complex and stratified, so too did its funerary architecture. The early dynastic period witnessed the emergence of the mastaba, a rectangular, flat-topped mud brick structure with sloping sides resembling a bench. Beneath this superstructure lay the burial shaft leading to a subterranean chamber where the deceased, often a noble or high official, was laid to rest. Mastabas were revolutionary, offering greater protection from grave robbers and the elements, and providing more space for elaborate funerary rituals and offerings. They represented the first concerted effort to create a permanent, constructed home for the K, a place where it could receive sustenance from the living and interact with the physical world. Imagine the psychological shift this represented. No longer simply burying in the earth, but building for eternity, asserting human will over the inevitability of decay. The mastaba was a foundational step, a crucial prototype that would pave the way for Egypt's most iconic architectural marvels. From the mastaba, the logical, breathtaking leap to the pyramid was made. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, conceived by the genius architect Imhotep during the Third Dynasty, was the very first monumental stone building in history. It began as a mastaba, then evolved into a series of stacked mastabas, each receding from the one below, creating a colossal stairway to the heavens. This wasn't just an architectural innovation, it was a profound theological statement. The pyramid symbolized the primordial mound from which creation itself arose, and it served as a cosmic ramp, a celestial stairway for the deceased pharaoh to ascend and join the circumpolar stars, the eternal, undying gods. Imagine the awe, the sheer spiritual power projected by such a structure, dominating the desert landscape, a tangible link between earth and sky. The step pyramid, however, was merely a prelude to the true age of the pyramids. In the 4th dynasty, under pharaohs like Sneferu, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the true pyramidal form was perfected. The Great Pyramid of Giza, commissioned by Khufu, remains one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a testament to unparalleled engineering, organizational prowess, and an almost inconceivable scale of ambition. Standing over 480 feet tall and comprising over 2 million massive stone blocks, it was a mountain built by man, an indestructible fortress designed to house and protect the pharaoh's mummified body and his vast treasures for eternity. You see, the Giza pyramids weren't just tombs, they were sophisticated resurrection machines, precisely aligned with astronomical phenomena, conduits for the pharaoh to achieve godhood alongside Re. Inside, complex systems of passages, vaults, chambers, and massive portcullises were designed to thwart grave robbers, a desperate, ultimately futile effort to secure the irreplaceable. As the Old Kingdom waned, and the centralized power of the pharaoh diminished, the grand exposed pyramids proved to be vulnerable targets for tomb raiders. This led to a significant shift in funerary architecture during the New Kingdom, c. 1550–1070 BCE. The pharaohs abandoned the highly visible pyramid in favor of hidden, rock-cut tombs carved deep into the limestone cliffs of the West Bank at Thebes, in what became known as the Valley of the Kings. Imagine the stark contrast. No longer a towering beacon, but a secret, labyrinthine sanctuary burrowed into the earth, designed for concealment and elaborate internal decoration rather than external display. These tombs were accessed by long, descending corridors, often featuring multiple chambers, false entrances, and elaborate decorative schemes that served as textual and pictorial maps of the underworld. The walls pulsed with vibrant frescoes, depicting the deceased pharaoh's journey through Duat, the perilous realm of the dead, guided by spells from the Book of the Dead and other funerary texts. These decorations were not merely aesthetic, they were functional magic, ensuring the pharaoh's safe passage and ultimate resurrection. Alongside the royal tombs, nobles and high officials also commissioned elaborate rock-cut tombs, though on a smaller scale, often decorated with scenes of their earthly lives, reflecting a burgeoning democratization of the afterlife. The belief in a blessed eternity was no longer solely the prerogative of the pharaoh, but a possibility for all who could afford the elaborate preparations. The internal layout of these tombs was crucial for the Ka, providing a physical space to dwell and receive offerings from the living. Many tombs featured a serdab chamber, a sealed room containing a statue of the deceased, through which the Ka could observe the offerings made in the offering chapel. Grave goods evolved alongside the tombs. Early, simple pottery gave way to elaborate furniture, clothing, jewelry, weapons, chariots, and even mummified pets. Crucially, the Ushabti figures emerged, small statuettes designed to magically animate and perform manual labor for the deceased in the afterlife, a symbolic replacement for the earlier, more disturbing practice of retainer sacrifice. These little figures, numbering in the hundreds for some pharaohs, represented a highly practical, magical solution to the problem of eternal toil. The evolution of Egyptian tombs from humble pits to colossal pyramids and hidden rock-cut sanctuaries tells a profound story. A continuous, desperate, yet ultimately hopeful quest for immortality. Each architectural innovation, each shift in decorative style was driven by the same core beliefs: the absolute necessity of preserving the body, the vital importance of providing a home for the spirit, and the unwavering conviction that death was merely a gateway to an eternal, more glorious existence. You see, for the ancient Egyptians, the tomb wasn't just a resting place for the dead. It was a workshop for transformation, a sacred vessel for eternity, a meticulously crafted bridge between the fleeting sands of time and the boundless expanse of forever. With the body preserved and encased within its eternal abode, the deceased's spiritual journey truly commenced, a perilous voyage through Duat, the ancient Egyptian underworld. This was no tranquil paradise awaiting immediate entry. It was a complex, treacherous realm, teeming with formidable guardians, fiery lakes, and terrifying demons, all to be navigated through a combination of ritual knowledge, protective amulets, and divine favor. Imagine this journey as a cosmic obstacle course, a series of trials and transformations essential for achieving the ultimate prize, eternal union with Osiris in the field of reeds. The primary guide for this spectral voyage was not a living escort, but an intricately illustrated scroll, a personalized spiritual roadmap known collectively to us as the Book of the Dead. Originally reserved for royalty by the New Kingdom, this collection of spells, hymns, and prayers, formerly titled the Book of Coming Forth by Day, became accessible to anyone who could afford to commission one. Each papyrus scroll was unique, tailored to the deceased, inscribed with specific incantations designed to open gates, appease malevolent entities, and provide the necessary passwords and transformations for safe passage. The journey began immediately after burial as the Ba, personality, and Ka, life force, of the deceased separated from the mummy, yet remained connected to it. The Ba was free to travel between the tomb and the world, while the Ka required sustenance at the tomb. To truly enter the afterlife, however, these spiritual components, along with the transfigured spirit, needed to successfully navigate Dua. The underworld itself was a multi-layered realm, often depicted in elaborate tomb paintings and papyri as a dark, cavernous landscape traversed by the solar barge of Re during his nightly journey. The deceased, therefore, symbolically joined Re in this nocturnal voyage, facing the same dangers and ultimately hoping for the same rebirth with the dawn. The spells in the Book of the Dead provided instructions for bypassing obstacles, transforming into various animal forms to escape predators, and asserting one's right to passage before the various judges and gatekeepers of the underworld. Imagine the sheer terror and the immense comfort these texts provided. A terrifying odyssey, meticulously catalogued, with every challenge met by a specific magical countermeasure, an ancient form of spiritual contingency planning. The most critical and feared moment in Duat was undoubtedly the weighing of the heart ceremony, presided over by Osiris himself, flanked by the 42 divine judges. This was the ultimate moral accounting, where the deceased's heart, considered the seat of conscience and intellect, was placed on one pan of a massive scale. On the other pan rested the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Imagine the hushed tension of this divine courtroom, the heart heavy with the deeds of a lifetime, trembling in the balance against the lightness of a single feather. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, meticulously adjusted the scales, while Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, stood ready to record the verdict. The deceased would deliver the negative confession or declaration of innocence, a list of 42 transgressions they claimed not to have committed. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied, and so on. This wasn't a denial of sin, but a declaration of having lived according to Ma'at. The stakes were unimaginably high. If the heart was heavier than the feather of Ma'at, signifying a life of imbalance and unrighteousness, it would be immediately devoured by Amit, the terrifying devourer of the dead, a monstrous creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This was the ultimate spiritual annihilation, the second death, condemning the soul to oblivion, utterly erasing its existence from the cosmic record. Imagine the profound fear this image instilled in every Egyptian, a fear more potent than any physical torment, the fear of being utterly forgotten, of ceasing to exist in any meaningful way. Conversely, if the heart balanced perfectly with Mayat's feather, the deceased was declared true of voice, or justified, and deemed worthy of entry into the blissful field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. This was the moment of ultimate triumph, the culmination of a life lived well and a journey successfully navigated. The field of reeds, Aru, was envisioned as an idealized version of Egypt itself, a verdant landscape of bountiful harvests, flowing canals, and eternal sunshine. Here, the justified dead would reunite with loved ones, farm the land with the help of their Ushapti figures, and live a life of eternal leisure and pleasure, free from want or suffering. Imagine the enduring appeal of such a paradise, a perfected echo of the life they knew and cherished, but without its hardships. The spells in the Book of the Dead often included prayers and instructions for how to farm, fish, and enjoy the fruits of the afterlife, reinforcing the idea of a continuous, improved existence. The deceased, now an Akh, a glorious spirit, would continue to participate in the cosmic order, offering praise to the gods and maintaining Ma'at. Crucially, the journey through Duat was not solely a passive experience. The deceased was expected to actively participate, to recall the spells, to know the names of the demons, and to assert their divine right to passage. This spiritual agency was vital, emphasizing the individual's responsibility for their own salvation. The funerary texts provided the tools, but the deceased had to wield them. Different social classes accessed this journey in varying ways. While a pharaoh's tomb walls might be entirely covered with the intricate texts of the Book of Gates or the Amduat, another underworld guide, an ordinary citizen might have only a few select spells written on their coffin or a modest papyrus roll placed with their mummy. The democratization of these texts over time, from exclusive royal prerogative to more widespread use, reflects a societal shift where the hope of a blessed afterlife extended to broader segments of the population, provided they could afford the necessary preparations. The journey through Duat, therefore, was a universal aspiration, a terrifying gauntlet and an ultimate test, all leading to the eternal promise of the field of reeds, a testament to the ancient Egyptians' profound and intricate vision of what lay beyond the veil of mortal life. Once the deceased's spiritual journey through Duat was carefully charted, the physical preparations for their eternal life required a meticulous array of provisions. The grave goods. These weren't merely sentimental trinkets. They were tangible necessities, magical tools, and profound symbols, designed to equip the eternal traveler for every conceivable need and desire in the field of reeds. Imagine, if you will, the tomb as a perfectly stocked pantry, a fully furnished home, and a spiritual arsenal, all painstakingly assembled to ensure the deceased's comfort, power, and continued prosperity in the afterlife. The core belief was beautifully pragmatic. Whatever was placed with the deceased in the tomb would magically manifest in the afterlife, ready for use. This transformed the burial chamber into a microcosm of their earthly existence, only enhanced and perfected. For the pharaohs, the sheer scale of these provisions was staggering, a testament to their godlike status and an unparalleled display of wealth. Take, for example, the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun, discovered almost entirely intact in 1922. The treasure found within was not merely decorative, it was functional for the afterlife. Imagine golden shrines, jewel-encrusted chests overflowing with amulets, and intricately carved furniture, chairs, beds, footstools, each designed to serve the king in his eternal palace. There were chariots, disassembled and ready for celestial journeys, along with bows, arrows, and other weapons for hunting and protection in the afterlife's vast plains. His wardrobe, too, was extensive, with fine linen garments and sandals, ensuring he would be impeccably dressed for any divine occasion. Food and drink were crucial. Vast stockpiles of grain, dried meats, wine, beer, honey, and dates, all contained in elegant jars and vessels, were included to sustain him through eternity. You see, the pharaoh's afterlife was conceived as an extension of his opulent earthly reign, demanding nothing less than the very best provisions imaginable for nobles and high-ranking officials. While less extravagant than a pharaoh's, their grave goods were still substantial, reflecting their status and anticipated comfort in the hereafter. Their tombs would be furnished with items they enjoyed in life: fine wooden chests, cosmetic jars, board games like Senet, which itself held spiritual significance, mimicking the soul's journey, and a selection of clothing and jewelry. Copies of the Book of the Dead, often beautifully illustrated, were essential, providing the deceased with the necessary spells. The walls of their tombs, unlike the pharaoh's focus on the underworld, often depicted idyllic scenes of their earthly lives, harvesting fields, hunting, banqueting, reinforcing the idea that their ideal existence would continue. These images were not just decorative, they were performative, magically ensuring the continuation of those activities in the afterlife. Even commoners, though their resources were limited, aspired to equip their dead for the journey. Their grave goods might consist of simple pottery containing food and water, basic tools, a few beads, or an amulet. Often the deceased would be wrapped in a simple linen shroud, perhaps with a small wooden stela inscribed with a prayer. The emphasis was on basic subsistence and essential protection rather than opulent luxury. The democratization of the afterlife meant that even the humblest individual hoped for a comfortable eternity, and their loved ones would provide what they could afford, ensuring their spiritual well-being. This universal drive, from the pharaoh to the peasant, underscores the deeply ingrained nature of the Egyptian belief system. Beyond the practical provisions, magical amulets played an indispensable role. These small, intricately carved charms, often made of faience, stone, or precious metals, were strategically placed on the mummy's body or within the bandages. Each amulet held specific protective or transformative powers activated by inscribed spells. The Ankh, representing life, was a powerful symbol of eternal existence. The scarab beetle, associated with the god Khepri, and the daily rebirth of the sun, was crucial for regeneration, often placed over the heart to replace it if it was deemed unworthy. The Eye of Horus offered protection against evil, while the Djed pillar symbolized stability and the backbone of Osiris, ensuring resurrection. Imagine the layers of magical defense, each amulet a tiny, potent shield, guaranteeing safe passage through Duat's myriad dangers. Crucially, the concept of labor in the afterlife was addressed through the ingenious Ushabti figures. These small statuettes, typically made of faience, wood, or stone, were depicted holding agricultural tools. The name Ushabti translates to answerer, reflecting their purpose. When summoned by the gods in the afterlife to perform arduous tasks, these figures would magically animate and answer on behalf of the deceased. A spell inscribed on each Ushabti, often from chapter 6 of the Book of the Dead, guaranteed their willingness and ability to work. Wealthy individuals might be buried with hundreds of these figures, ensuring a workforce for every day of the year, freeing the deceased for eternal leisure. This represented a profound innovation, replacing earlier, more brutal forms of labor provision with a magical, symbolic solution. Mummified pets were another category of grave goods, particularly for the elite. Animals, seen as companions and sometimes as sacred manifestations of deities, were often buried with their owners. Pharaohs like Ramses II were interred with their beloved dogs or even lions, providing companionship in the afterlife. More common were mummified cats, often associated with the goddess Bastet, or baboons linked to Thoth. These animal mummies not only provided comfort, but also reinforced the deceased's connection to the divine. Imagine the blend of human affection and profound religious belief that led to such burials, a testament to the Egyptian understanding of all life as sacred and interconnected. The sheer volume and variety of grave goods, from the simplest pottery shard to the most dazzling golden death mask, reflect a civilization utterly convinced of the continuity of existence. Death was not an end, but a transition, and equipping oneself properly for this eternal voyage was the most critical task of life. The grave goods were more than possessions. They were extensions of the deceased's identity, tools for their survival, and symbols of their aspirations in the boundless expanse of forever. You see, the ancient Egyptians didn't just believe in an afterlife. They actively prepared for it, meticulously assembling everything required to live, thrive, and reign in their eternal paradise. With the mummy meticulously prepared and the tomb stocked with grave goods, the final farewell began, a grand and profoundly symbolic funerary procession, marking the deceased's transition from the living world to their eternal home. Imagine a scene pulsating with both solemn grief and hopeful anticipation, a carefully choreographed spectacle designed to bridge the chasm between two realms. The journey from the house of embalming to the tomb was often lengthy, especially for the elite, requiring a complex retinue and a series of vital rituals. The procession itself was a powerful public display, reinforcing social order and religious belief, a final communal act of honoring the departed and guiding them towards their destiny. At the head of the procession, typically for a pharaoh or high-ranking noble, would be a team of priests, carrying incense burners that filled the air with aromatic smoke, purifying the path and warding off malevolent spirits. Their chants, recited from sacred texts, created a rhythmic, otherworldly soundtrack to the journey. Following them, a retinue of mourners, often including professional wailers, would tear at their hair and garments, their cries of anguish piercing the desert air. These deeply emotional displays were not merely expressions of grief. They were also a ritualistic act of severance, acknowledging the profound loss while simultaneously preparing for the deceased's new existence. Imagine the visceral impact of this lamentation, a collective outpouring of sorrow that drew the community into the sacred space of mourning. The sarcophagus, containing the mummy and its nested coffins, was the heart of the procession, often transported on a large sledge pulled by oxen or, for royalty, by teams of men. For a pharaoh, this could be an incredibly ornate and heavy affair, requiring hundreds of individuals to move it, symbolizing the immense weight of the king's journey and the collective effort required to ensure his safe passage. Leading the sarcophagus, often a son or a designated priest playing the role of Horus, would ensure the correct path and perform key rites. Close behind, female mourners, often embodying Isis and Nephthys, the divine sisters who lamented Osiris, would offer symbolic protection and guidance. Their presence was crucial, reenacting the primal myth of mourning and resurrection, instilling hope amidst the sorrow. The procession was also laden with practical, albeit symbolic, elements. Other sledges would follow, bearing the canopic chest, containing the preserved internal organs, large chests of grave goods, and offerings. These were visible reminders of the deceased's status and the meticulous preparations made for their afterlife. Servants, often depicted in funerary art, carried provisions, tools, and even models of boats or estates, all destined to join the deceased in the tomb. This visual tableau presented a comprehensive picture of the deceased's earthly life and their anticipated eternal existence, blurring the lines between the two realms. Imagine the long, slow march across the desert, the sun beating down, the dust rising, the air thick with incense and wails, a powerful, moving spectacle unfolding before the eyes of the community. Upon arrival at the tomb entrance, a series of vital rituals took place. Foremost among these was the opening of the mouth ceremony, arguably the most crucial ritual for ensuring the deceased's ability to function in the afterlife. Performed by a Sem priest, often the eldest son or heir, this ritual symbolically restored the deceased's senses. Their ability to breathe, eat, speak, see, and hear, which were believed to have been lost in the process of death and mummification. Imagine the Sem priest wielding ritual instruments like an adze, a craftsman's tool symbolizing creation, touching the mouth, eyes, nose, and ears of the mummy or its coffin. Each touch was accompanied by specific incantations, reanimating the spirit within the physical form. This was not merely symbolic. It was believed to be a literal act of recreation, granting the deceased the full range of abilities required to enjoy their eternal life and interact with the divine. Without the opening of the mouth, the mummy was essentially a mute, blind, and insensate shell, unable to partake in the joys of the field of reeds or offer praise to the gods. Following the opening of the mouth, further offerings of food, drink, and incense would be made at the tomb entrance. These offerings, often including choice cuts of meat, fresh bread, and libations of water and wine, were essential sustenance for the Kay, which remained in the tomb, requiring nourishment from the living. The offerings were presented on an offering table, and priests would recite specific prayers, ensuring their magical transmission to the spiritual double. This act reinforced the ongoing relationship between the living and the dead, a reciprocal exchange where the living provided sustenance and the dead, in turn, could offer blessings or intercession. Imagine the continuing dialogue, the threads of connection that bound families across the veil of death, a powerful bond of duty and affection. Finally, the mummy, within its nested coffins and sarcophagus, along with the canopic jars and the bulk of the grave goods, would be carefully lowered into the burial chamber. For royal tombs, this was often a complex logistical feat, involving intricate ramps, ropes, and the precise maneuvering of immense stone sarcophagi. Once inside, the chamber would be sealed, often with multiple layers of stone and rubble, disguised to deter tomb robbers. The tomb itself, now closed, became the ultimate sanctuary, the eternal home where the deceased would begin their journey through Duat, protected and provided for. The living, having completed their sacred duties, would then often return from the necropolis to hold a funerary feast, a communal meal that blended sorrow with celebration, marking the acceptance of the loss and the continuation of life. This feast was a final act of remembrance and community, reinforcing the bonds of the living while honoring the departed. The funerary procession, therefore, was a rich tapestry of grief, ritual, and profound belief, a meticulously performed dance between worlds, ensuring that the deceased transitioned not into oblivion, but into a meticulously prepared and eternally hoped-for existence, while the underlying belief in an eternal afterlife permeated all levels of ancient Egyptian society. The reality of that eternity varied dramatically depending on one's social standing and, crucially, one's wealth. Imagine a society deeply stratified where privilege extended beyond the grave, influencing not just the grandeur of one's tomb, but the very perceived quality and security of one's immortal existence. The democratization of the afterlife was a gradual process, but even at its peak, a stark chasm separated the celestial voyage of a pharaoh from the humble eternity of a common peasant. For the pharaohs, the afterlife was not merely a continuation of life, it was an apotheosis, a transformation into a divine being ruling alongside the gods. Their eternal journey was meticulously planned to ensure they joined Re in his solar barge, battled the forces of chaos, and ultimately became one with Osiris, ruler of the underworld. Their monumental pyramids and hidden rock-cut tombs were designed not just to house their bodies, but to serve as elaborate resurrection machines, launching their spirits into the stars. The wall decorations within these royal tombs were sophisticated spiritual guides, featuring texts like the Amduat and the Book of Gates, detailed maps of the underworld and its inhabitants. essential knowledge for navigating the perilous journey. Their grave goods, as we've seen, were unparalleled. Gold, jewels, intricate furniture, chariots, Ushabti armies, all designed to furnish an eternal palace and ensure a life of perpetual luxury and power. The pharaoh's afterlife was a cosmos of its own, mirroring and magnifying the absolute authority they wielded on earth, a testament to a belief system where divine kingship knew no temporal bounds. For the wealthy elite, nobles, viziers, high priests, and scribes, the afterlife was also envisioned as an idealized continuation of their privileged earthly existence, albeit without the explicit divine apotheosis of the pharaoh. Their rock-cut tombs, though smaller than royal ones, were exquisitely decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting scenes of their daily lives, bountiful harvests, joyous banquets, successful hunts, and harmonious family gathering. These were not mere memories. They were magical affirmations, spells in pigment and stone, designed to magically manifest these pleasant activities for eternity. Their tombs often featured offering chapels where family members could present food and drink, ensuring the sustenance of the Ka. Grave goods for this class included fine furniture, jewelry, cosmetic items, musical instruments, and a personal selection of spells from the Book of the Dead, often inscribed on papyrus rolls or their coffins. Imagine a wealthy noble eternally supervising his bountiful estates, enjoying leisurely hunts and feasting with his family, all within the protective confines of his beautifully decorated tomb. Their eternity was one of comfort, recognition, and continued social status, a well-deserved reward for a life lived in accordance with Ma'at and in service to the pharaoh. For artisans and skilled craftsmen, a burgeoning middle class in certain periods, their afterlife hopes centered on continuing their craft and enjoying a comfortable, unburdened existence. Their tombs, often simpler than those of the elite, might still feature painted scenes depicting their work, a sculptor creating a statue, a jeweler crafting ornaments, affirming their professional identity. Grave goods would include the tools of their trade, along with basic provisions and perhaps a few amulets. The aspiration was not necessarily to rule, but to create, to ply their trade in a perfect, eternal workshop, free from earthly constraints. Their access to funerary texts was more limited, perhaps a few key spells painted on their coffin, relying on the more common versions of the Book of the Dead. The belief was that their skills, honed in life, would find expression and purpose in the afterlife, contributing to the eternal harmony of the field of reeds. For the vast majority of Egyptians, the peasants, farmers, and laborers, the afterlife was a far more modest, yet equally cherished aspiration. Their burials were simpler, often in shallow pits in the desert, sometimes marked by a simple wooden stela. Mummification, if affordable, was rudimentary, or they relied on natural desiccation. Their grave goods were sparse, a few pots containing food and water, perhaps a small, mass-produced amulet, or a worn tool. Yet the core belief persisted. They too hoped to reach the field of reeds, to farm its fertile lands, to be free from the back-breaking labor of their earthly lives. The Ushabti figures were particularly important for this class, as they represented the magical promise of relief from toil. Even a few Ushabtis could magically perform the necessary work, ensuring the peasant could enjoy their eternal reward. Imagine a farmer after a lifetime of hard labor under the relentless sun, dreaming of a bountiful, effortlessly harvested field of reeds, where his Ushabtis would toil on his behalf, allowing him to rest. The concept of the democratization of the afterlife refers to the gradual expansion of access to funerary rites and the hope of eternal bliss. In the Old Kingdom, elaborate tombs and texts were largely the preserve of the pharaoh and his closest court. By the Middle Kingdom, this access broadened to the provincial elite, and by the New Kingdom, and certainly into the late period, Many more people, if they could afford the services of embalmers and scribes, could access personalized funerary preparations. This shift was profound, indicating a societal realization that the divine promise of Maat and Osiris was not limited to the ruling class, but extended to all who lived a just life. However, this democratization was still largely economic. The quality of mummification, the grandeur of the tomb, and the extent of textual guidance were direct reflections of one's wealth. A wealthy commoner could potentially have a more elaborate burial than an impoverished noble. Thus, while the hope was universal, the experience of eternity remained deeply stratified, a poignant reflection of a society where status and resources shaped one's destiny even beyond the grave. The afterlife, therefore, was not a single monolithic destination, but a spectrum of eternal experiences, each meticulously tailored to the earthly life it followed, a testament to a civilization that believed wealth, status, and diligent preparation could truly endure forever. The elaborate journey to the ancient Egyptian afterlife was not a solitary endeavor, nor was it solely the responsibility of the deceased and their immediate family. It was a vast, intricate enterprise fueled by a specialized cadre of professionals whose sacred knowledge, meticulous skills, and ritualistic expertise were absolutely indispensable. Imagine, if you will, an entire industry dedicated to death and eternity, a complex ecosystem of priests, embalmers, scribes, artisans, and laborers, all working in concert to ensure the successful transition of the departed. These were the guardians of the dead, the orchestrators of immortality, whose every action was imbued with profound religious and practical significance. At the apex of this funerary hierarchy were the lector priests, known as Keri Hebbul. These highly educated individuals were masters of sacred texts, responsible for reciting the spells and incantations from the Book of the Dead and other funerary literature during the embalming process, the procession, and at the tomb. Their role was critical. The correct pronunciation and rhythmic delivery of these words were believed to magically activate their power, guiding the deceased through duat, appeasing malevolent spirits, and ensuring divine favor. Imagine a lector priest, his voice resonating through the solemn chambers, his words a lifeline for the soul, a spiritual GPS guiding the deceased through the underworld's labyrinthine passages. Their literacy and mastery of arcane knowledge made them indispensable interpreters of the divine will and facilitators of eternal life. They were often depicted with a scroll unfurling before them, their faces set in an expression of intense concentration, for a single misspoken word could imperil the entire journey. Closely associated with the lector priests were the sem priests, recognizable by the panther skin draped over their shoulders. The sem priests' most critical role was performing the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual of paramount importance. As we've discussed, this act symbolically restored the deceased's senses, allowing them to eat, speak, breathe, and interact in the afterlife. Often, the eldest son of the deceased would perform this role, stepping into the sacred shoes of Horus, reenacting the primal act of a son restoring his father Osiris to life. Imagine the profound emotional and spiritual weight of this moment for a son, fulfilling his ultimate filial duty, literally breathing life back into his deceased parent, ensuring their eternal vitality. Beyond this, a variety of other priests, from those dedicated to specific deities like the priests of Anubis, to those who oversaw offerings in the mortuary cults, played supporting roles, ensuring every aspect of the deceased's transition was handled with due reverence and precision. Then came the embalmers, the wetu, the skilled craftsmen of immortality. These were the individuals who meticulously carried out the 70-day mummification process. As we explored, their work was not merely medical or technical. It was deeply ritualistic, guided by ancient knowledge and sacred practices. The chief embalmer, often wearing the mask of Anubis, transformed the gruesomeness of evisceration and desiccation into a spiritual alchemy. They understood human anatomy, the properties of natron, oils, and resins, and the intricate art of bandaging and adornment. Imagine the practical skill combined with unwavering spiritual focus required to perform such a task, to painstakingly preserve and beautify a body for a divine encounter. They were compensated for their services, their fees varying based on the elaborateness of the mummification, a testament to the economic value placed on securing eternal life. Scribes, those literate few, were also crucial to the funerary industry. They meticulously copied the spells for the Book of the Dead onto papyrus scrolls, coffins, and tomb walls. Each text had to be accurate, legible, and often beautifully illustrated, as errors could have dire spiritual consequences for the deceased. Imagine a scribe hunched over his work, painstakingly rendering hieroglyphs, his reed pen flying across the papyrus, knowing that the eternal fate of a soul rested on his precision. Their expertise in writing and their knowledge of the correct magical formulae made them invaluable partners in the quest for the afterlife. Finally, the countless artisans and laborers brought the material aspects of the afterlife to fruition. Talented sculptors carved sarcophagi and statues. Painters adorned tomb walls with vibrant frescoes, creating the visual narratives of the journey through Duat and the idyllic life in the field of reeds. Jewelers crafted amulets and ornaments, each with its own symbolic power. Carpenters built coffins and funerary furniture. Potters created vessels for offerings and grave goods. Laborers quarried stone, dug tombs, and transported massive sarcophagi. Imagine the bustling activity around the necropolises, the chipping of stone, the mixing of paints, the steady rhythm of construction, all dedicated to the eternal comfort of the departed. The creation of Ushabti figures alone required a specialized craft, turning out hundreds of these small Ansara figurines for a single elite burial. This vast network of specialists meant that preparing for death was a significant economic driver in ancient Egypt, a massive undertaking that employed countless individuals and consumed substantial resources. From the lowliest laborer digging a tomb shaft to the most revered lector priest reciting sacred spells, each played a vital part in ensuring the deceased's eternal well-being. The existence of these dedicated professionals underscores the profound societal commitment to the afterlife. It wasn't just a personal belief. It was an institutionalized imperative, a sacred industry that sustained itself through millennia, demonstrating an unwavering faith that life, in some glorious form, truly would continue forever. You see, the guardians of the dead weren't just performing a service. They were actively weaving the very fabric of eternity, ensuring that every Egyptian, according to their means, could embark on their ultimate journey with the divine assurance of skilled hands and sacred knowledge guiding their way. Despite the meticulous planning, monumental construction, and sacred rituals designed to secure eternal rest, the ancient Egyptian afterlife was perpetually shadowed by a grim reality, the relentless scourge of tomb robbery. Imagine, if you will, the desperate clash between unwavering faith in the continuity of existence and the very human motivations of greed, desperation, and utter disregard for the sacred. The tombs, magnificent vessels for eternity, became irresistible targets, transforming the hallowed resting places into battlegrounds between the sanctity of the dead and the rapacious desires of the living. This constant threat of desecration profoundly shaped Egyptian funerary practices, driving innovations in tomb design, security measures, and even the very curses inscribed upon their walls. The motivations behind tomb robbery were brutally simple: the immense wealth contained within. Pharaohs and wealthy nobles were buried with unimaginable treasures: gold, silver, precious stones, exotic perfumes, fine linens, and valuable artifacts, all believed to magically manifest in the afterlife. For a population often living on the margins, particularly during periods of economic hardship, the lure of such riches was overwhelming, transforming sacred obligations into dangerous temptations. Imagine a starving peasant witnessing the opulent burial of a pharaoh, knowing that unimaginable wealth lay just beyond a few feet of stone. The sanctity of the tomb, while theoretically sacrosanct, often crumbled before the pragmatic realities of survival. This wasn't merely petty theft. It was systematic plunder, often carried out by organized gangs, some of whom were former tomb builders or necropolis workers who possessed intimate knowledge of the hidden passages and defensive mechanisms. The Egyptians employed various measures to deter robbers, which evolved dramatically over the millennia. Early mastabas offered limited protection, making them easy targets. The pyramids, however, were engineering marvels designed as impregnable fortresses. Imagine the architects of the Great Pyramid, incorporating complex systems of ascending and descending passages, false chambers, massive granite portcullises weighing many tons, and even secret sliding blocks to conceal the true burial chamber. The very scale of the pyramid itself was meant to be a deterrent, a mountain of stone that seemed insurmountable. Yet, even these colossal efforts proved largely ineffective. Most pyramids were breached and stripped of their treasures within a few centuries of their construction. The sheer determination and ingenuity of the robbers often matched, if not surpassed, that of the builders. They would tunnel around the massive blocks, climb through ventilation shafts, or simply force their way through weaker sections, their lamps flickering in the eternal darkness, desecrating sacred spaces for earthly gain. The shift to the rock-cut tombs of the Valley of the Kings during the New Kingdom was a direct response to the vulnerability of the pyramids. The idea was concealment, burying the pharaohs in secret, labyrinthine passages deep within the cliffs, making them difficult to locate and even harder to access. Imagine the engineers carving intricate tunnels, often hundreds of feet long, designed with multiple turns, steep descents, and massive stone doors. Some tombs included false shafts or collapsing ceilings, primitive booby traps intended to deter or even bury intruders. Yet, the Valley of the Kings ultimately suffered a similar fate. Most royal tombs, including those of Seti I, Ramses II, and many others, were systematically looted within a few centuries. Tutankhamun's tomb, famously discovered largely intact, was a rare exception, having been entered and partially plundered at least twice in antiquity before being buried by subsequent debris, an accidental act of preservation. The discovery of hidden caches of royal mummies, reburied by loyal priests in later dynasties to protect them from further desecration, serves as a poignant testament to the rampant nature of tomb robbery and the desperate efforts to salvage sacred remains. The consequences of tomb robbery extended far beyond the loss of valuable artifacts. They struck at the very heart of Egyptian religious belief. The desecration of a mummy, the scattering of grave goods, the defilement of the tomb all directly threatened the deceased's ability to achieve and sustain eternal life. Without its physical vessel, the Ka would be homeless, the Ba unable to return, and the entire spiritual journey imperiled. Imagine the profound anxiety this created, a future in the afterlife constantly threatened by earthly thieves. This fear led to the widespread inscription of curses on tomb walls, terrifying threats against anyone who dared disturb the sacred resting place. These curses, often invoking divine wrath, disease, or eternal suffering, were intended as a magical deterrent, a spiritual defense against mortal greed. While modern scholars often dismiss them as mere superstition, they were a very real and serious concern for the ancient Egyptians, reflecting the deep-seated fear of eternal annihilation. The authorities, particularly during the New Kingdom, did attempt to combat tomb robbery with varying degrees of success. Court documents from the 20th dynasty, for example, detail meticulous investigations into widespread necropolis robberies, including interrogations, confessions, and the eventual punishment of the culprits. These records reveal a grim picture. Entire gangs of robbers, sometimes even including corrupt priests and officials who turned a blind eye or actively participated, systematically plundering the tombs. Punishments were severe, ranging from beatings and mutilation to impalement and burning alive, demonstrating the gravity with which the Egyptians viewed these crimes against the sacred dead. Yet, despite these efforts, the shadow of disruption persisted, a constant, nagging challenge to the meticulously constructed edifice of eternal life. The legacy of tomb robbery is complex. On one hand, it represents a tragic loss of priceless historical and archaeological data, as countless artifacts were destroyed or scattered. On the other hand, the efforts to prevent it drove remarkable innovations in architecture, engineering, and security design, pushing the boundaries of ancient capabilities. Furthermore, the sheer determination of tomb robbers inadvertently led to discoveries like the royal caches, which preserved important mummies for modern study. You see, the constant struggle against tomb robbery was more than a fight against crime. It was a desperate battle to maintain the integrity of the afterlife itself, a testament to a civilization's unwavering belief that death was not an end, and that even in eternity, vigilance was required against the dark forces of human avarice. As we delve deeper into the ancient Egyptian relationship with death, we must confront some of the more unsettling, even horrifying practices that underscore the profound, sometimes brutal, lengths to which they would go to secure the afterlife. Imagine, if you will, the chilling spectre of retainer sacrifice, a custom of early dynasties where living beings, both human and animal, were deliberately killed to accompany their master into the realm of the dead. This wasn't mere ritual. It was a visceral act of power and belief, a testament to the absolute authority of the pharaoh and the unyielding conviction that earthly service must continue into eternity. These practices, while thankfully short-lived in their most extreme forms, leave a dark stain on the otherwise dazzling legacy of Egyptian civilization. The most striking evidence of human retainer sacrifice comes from the earliest periods of Egyptian history, particularly the First Dynasty, c. 3100–2890 BCE, in royal burial grounds like Abydos. Here, around the monumental tombs of pharaohs such as Jer and Jet, archaeologists have unearthed numerous subsidiary graves. Imagine the shocking discovery: rows upon rows of bodies, men, women, and even children, meticulously arranged in satellite burials surrounding the main royal tomb. At King Jer's tomb, over 300 individuals were found, buried in neat lines. These individuals were not randomly interred. They were palace servants, bodyguards, and high officials, hand-picked to continue their duties in the afterlife. Evidence suggests they were often killed at the time of the pharaoh's burial, perhaps by strangulation, a blow to the head, or even slow poisoning, to ensure their synchronization with the king's journey to Duat. Imagine the terror, the resigned acceptance, or perhaps even the fervent belief that such an honor bestowed eternal purpose. These were not slaves in the traditional sense, but often high-ranking members of the court, chosen for their loyalty and importance. Their sacrifice was seen as a privilege, guaranteeing them a place in the pharaoh's eternal retinue, rather than an obscure fate. The rationale behind retainer sacrifice was starkly logical within the Egyptian belief system. Just as the pharaoh required a retinue to serve him in life, so too would he need one to attend to his every whim in the afterlife. Without his loyal servants, how could he navigate the complexities of eternal existence? This practice was a direct manifestation of the pharaoh's divine power, an extension of his absolute command, even beyond the veil of death. The subsidiary graves were not merely places of burial. They were functional extensions of the royal tomb, a living, or rather dying, proof of the king's unassailable authority. Imagine the fear and awe this must have instilled in the populace, a chilling reminder that the pharaoh's power transcended mortal boundaries. Thankfully, by the end of the Second Dynasty, human retainer sacrifice largely faded out, replaced by more symbolic, less brutal methods of ensuring eternal service. This shift marked a significant evolution in Egyptian funerary thought, perhaps driven by the immense cost in human life, or a more sophisticated understanding of how magic could achieve the same ends. The rise of Ushabti figures was the primary symbolic replacement. These small figurines, designed to magically animate and perform labor in the afterlife, effectively provided a tireless, silent workforce without the need for human slaughter. Imagine the relief and ingenuity this represented, achieving the same goal, eternal service, without the accompanying human cost. This marked a profound turning point, moving from literal violence to magical surrogate, a testament to a civilization's capacity for both brutality and evolving ethical consideration within its religious framework. However, the practice of animal sacrifice and burial continued throughout much of Egyptian history, taking on various forms. Pharaohs and nobles were often buried with their beloved pets, dogs, cats, monkeys, gazelles, and even lions. These animals were not merely companions. They were believed to provide comfort and protection for their masters in the afterlife, ensuring a familiar presence in the vast unknown. Imagine the emotional bond between a pharaoh and his hunting dog, powerful enough to ensure the animal's place in eternity alongside him. The mummification of these animals, often as meticulous as that of humans, further underscores their importance. The tomb of King Hor-Aha, for instance, contained 10 donkeys, believed to have carried his funerary gifts, while the first dynasty pharaoh Den was buried with no less than 12 baboons, creatures considered sacred to Thoth, beyond personal pets. Vast quantities of sacred animals were mummified and buried, not as companions for the deceased, but as offerings to specific deities. Imagine underground catacombs stretching for miles, filled with millions of animal mummies. Ibis birds for Thoth, cats for Bastet, crocodiles for Sobek, falcons for Horus. These weren't individual burials, but mass offerings, often purchased by pilgrims and presented to priests, who would then mummify the animals and inter them in vast communal tombs. This practice, particularly prevalent in the late period, reflects a different aspect of Egyptian belief, using animal intermediaries to communicate with and appease the gods, ensuring blessings for the living. Imagine the sheer scale of such operations, the countless animals bred and sacrificed for this purpose, a testament to the enduring religious fervor that permeated every aspect of Egyptian life. Perhaps one of the most bizarre grave goods was the discovery of human hair wigs, particularly from the tomb of the 18th dynasty pharaoh Amenhotep II. While not a direct sacrifice, the vast quantities of these wigs, made from the hair of young girls and women, raise unsettling questions. They were apparently intended to provide the pharaoh with a ready supply of fresh hair in the afterlife, a symbol of eternal youth, vitality, and virility. Imagine the societal implications of such a practice, where the hair of living individuals, possibly servants or those of lesser status, was considered a valuable commodity for the deceased pharaoh's eternal comfort. It speaks to a subtle yet powerful form of exploitation where the living continued to serve the dead in unconventional ways. These darker practices, from human retainers to animal offerings and hair wigs, provide a chilling glimpse into the absolute power wielded by the pharaohs and the profound, sometimes disturbing, implications of their quest for immortality. While they might seem barbaric to modern sensibilities, within the ancient Egyptian worldview, they were logical, necessary, and even sacred acts, ensuring the king's divine status and the continued stability of the cosmos. The human cost, the animal lives, the subtle forms of exploitation, all were deemed acceptable in the relentless pursuit of an eternal existence, a legacy of chilling devotion that continues to fascinate and horrify us today. You see, the ancient Egyptians did not just prepare for death, In some instances, they actively orchestrated it, weaving sacrifice into the very fabric of their eternal aspirations. For the ancient Egyptians, death did not sever the bonds between family and community. It merely transformed them. The living maintained an active, reciprocal relationship with the deceased, one governed by rituals, offerings, and a deep-seated belief that the departed still held influence, capable of bestowing blessings or casting curses. Imagine, if you will, a subtle yet omnipresent dialogue between the realms, a continuous thread of connection sustained through elaborate cults of the dead and fervent ancestor worship. This wasn't a distant, abstract belief. It was a practical, daily reality that underscored the profound interconnectedness of all existence. At the core of this ongoing relationship was the mortuary cult, a system of offerings and prayers directed towards the deceased, particularly for pharaohs and wealthy nobles. For the king, this was a massive undertaking, often involving dedicated mortuary temples like the sprawling Ramesseum of Ramses II or Hatshepsut's exquisite temple at Deir el-Bahari. These temples were not just monuments. They were living institutions staffed by hundreds of priests, scribes, and administrators. Their primary duty was to maintain the eternal well-being of the deceased pharaoh by performing daily rituals, presenting food, drink, and incense offerings before his statues or stelae. Imagine the meticulous routine: priests chanting hymns at dawn, offering fresh bread and libations, ensuring the ka of the pharaoh was eternally nourished, thus empowering him to continue his divine role in the afterlife. These offerings were believed to be magically transmitted to the deceased, sustaining their spiritual essence. In return, the pharaoh, now a powerful A'ak, effective spirit, was expected to intercede on behalf of Egypt and its people before the gods. For nobles and wealthy citizens, their mortuary cults were smaller, often centered around an offering chapel within their tomb or a dedicated altar in their home. Family members, rather than a large priestly staff, bore the primary responsibility for maintaining these cults. They would visit the tomb regularly, especially on feast days, to present offerings of food, water, and flowers, reciting prayers and personal appeals. These acts of devotion ensured the K had sustenance and the B had a safe haven to return to from its travels. Imagine a son or daughter kneeling before the stela of their deceased parent, quietly offering food and seeking guidance, believing that their loved one could still hear them, still watch over them. This reciprocal arrangement created a powerful sense of continuity and obligation, binding generations together across the veil of death. A key architectural feature facilitating this communication was the serdab chamber, a small sealed room often found in mastabas and early tombs. Inside the serdab was a statue of the deceased, typically carved from stone, which served as an alternate dwelling for the ka if the mummy were ever damaged or destroyed. Crucially, the serdab would often have small slits or holes at eye level, allowing the ka within the statue to see and smell the offerings placed in the adjoining offering chapel. Imagine the subtle yet profound belief. The deceased, through their statue, was still a silent observer, part of the living world, receiving the love and sustenance of their family, an ever-present yet unseen guardian. Beyond formal cults, ancestor worship was deeply ingrained in household religion. Many Egyptian homes had small shrines or niches dedicated to revered ancestors, particularly those who had achieved success or lived a long life. These ancestors, now spirits, were seen as powerful intermediaries capable of influencing the lives of the living for good or ill. People would light lamps, burn incense, and offer small libations to these household shrines, seeking blessings, protection, or advice. Imagine a family gathering around their ancestor shrine, recounting tales of their forebears, teaching their children about their lineage, strengthening their communal identity, and ensuring the memory of the dead lived on. This was a vital aspect of social cohesion. linking the present to the past through an unbroken chain of veneration. A fascinating manifestation of this ongoing relationship was the practice of writing letters to the dead. These were actual papyrus scrolls or ostraca, pottery shards, inscribed with letters from the living to their deceased relatives. Imagine someone perhaps struggling with an injustice or a personal dilemma, writing directly to their departed parent or spouse, appealing for their intervention in the divine court, or simply seeking their counsel from beyond the grave. These letters would be placed in the tomb, on the offering table, or even within the coffin, believing they would reach the intended recipient in the afterlife. The content of these letters often revealed profound human emotions: grief, hope, frustration, love, underscoring the very real belief in the deceased's continued agency and influence. They might complain about family disputes, ask for help against rivals, or simply express enduring affection, demonstrating that death was not a barrier to communication, but merely changed its medium. The concept of the Ak was crucial here. And that was not just a dead person. It was a transfigured or effective spirit, someone who had successfully navigated Duat past the weighing of the heart and was now capable of interacting with both the divine and the earthly realms. Such an could be a benevolent protector, a source of wisdom, or, if neglected or wronged, a malevolent force. This duality placed a significant responsibility on the living to properly honor and propitiate their dead, ensuring their satisfaction and goodwill. Neglecting the mortuary cult or failing to remember an ancestor could lead to curses, misfortune, or hauntings, creating a powerful incentive for continuous veneration. This enduring interaction between the living and the dead underscores a fundamental aspect of Egyptian spirituality: the seamless integration of past, present, and future. Death was not an end but a continuation, a constant dialogue between realms, sustained by ritual, memory, and unwavering faith. The cults of the dead and ancestor worship were not morbid fixations. They were vital expressions of community, piety, and the profound belief that even across the greatest divide, love and duty could truly bind souls forever. You see, for the ancient Egyptians, the departed were not truly gone. They had simply moved to a different address. And with the right words and offerings, communication and influence were still very much possible. The vast timeline of ancient Egypt, stretching over 3 millennia, witnessed not a static, unchanging view of death, but a dynamic and complex evolution of beliefs and practices. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate shifting of spiritual sands as ideas about the afterlife were refined, democratized, and occasionally influenced by the tides of foreign rule. While certain core tenets, the necessity of body preservation, the journey through Duat, the hope of eternal life, remained remarkably consistent. The specifics of how these beliefs were expressed and accessed underwent profound transformations, reflecting societal, political, and economic changes. In the Old Kingdom, c. 2686 to 181 BCE, the afterlife was largely seen as the exclusive preserve of the pharaoh. His divine status ensured his direct path to joining the circumpolar stars and becoming one with Re. The monumental pyramids were the ultimate expression of this royal privilege, colossal machines designed to launch the king's soul into the heavens. For nobles and high officials, their afterlife was initially conceived as an extension of their service to the pharaoh, an eternal proximity to the divine king. Their mastaba tombs featured scenes of them serving the pharaoh, and their hope for eternity was often tied to his continued existence. Mummification was rudimentary for many, with the most elaborate techniques reserved for royalty. The few funerary texts, like the pyramid texts inscribed on royal tomb walls, were exclusive spells for the king, ensuring his successful ascension and battling underworld dangers. The concept of the democratization of the afterlife had yet to fully emerge. Salvation, for the elite, was a trickle down from the pharaoh's divine journey. the collapse of centralized power at the end of the Old Kingdom, leading to the First Intermediate Period, brought about a significant shift. With the pharaoh's power diminished, the elite and even some commoners began to assert their own claims to eternal life, no longer solely reliant on the king's divine intercession. Imagine a society grappling with uncertainty where the traditional pathway to immortality seemed less secure. This era saw the emergence of the coffin texts, a new corpus of spells often inscribed on the wooden coffins of nobles and wealthy individuals. These texts were adapted from the royal pyramid texts, but crucially they were personalized and democratized, allowing more individuals to access the magical knowledge required to navigate Duat and achieve an Osirian afterlife. The emphasis shifted from royal stellar immortality to becoming one with Osiris, a more accessible path to eternal life for a broader segment of society. This was a profound moment, a spiritual revolution that began to open the gates of paradise to more than just kings. The Middle Kingdom, c. 2045-1650 BCE, solidified this democratization. Mummification techniques became more widely available and sophisticated for the non-royal elite, and elaborate rock-cut tombs for provincial governors and wealthy families became common. The Book of the Dead began to take shape during this period, evolving from the coffin texts into a distinct, portable collection of spells that could be customized for individuals. Grave goods, including Ushabti figures, became standard for the elite, ensuring a comfortable eternity for those who could afford it. Imagine the vibrant new possibilities for eternal life, no longer dictated solely by proximity to the pharaoh, but by individual piety, wealth, and diligent preparation. The concept of the weighing of the heart before Osiris also became more central, emphasizing individual moral accountability as the ultimate arbiter of one's eternal fate, rather than solely inherited divine right. The New Kingdom, c. 1550-1070 BCE, represented the zenith of Egyptian imperial power and consequently its funerary practices. Pharaohs, while still revered, increasingly shifted from exposed pyramids to hidden, rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings, driven by the persistent problem of tomb robbery. These tombs became canvases for elaborate underworld narratives, such as the Book of Amduat and the Book of Gates, detailed guides for the pharaoh's journey through the nocturnal hours with Re. Mummification reached its peak of sophistication, producing remarkably well-preserved royal remains. The Book of the Dead was ubiquitous, often beautifully illustrated on papyrus scrolls, placed within coffins, and painted on tomb walls for a wide range of social classes. The mortuary cults for pharaohs became vast institutions, employing thousands to ensure the eternal sustenance of the royal caste. Grave goods for the elite reached unparalleled levels of opulence, epitomized by Tutankhamun's tomb. This was an era of both supreme royal assertion and widespread access to elaborate funerary provisions. The late period, c. 664, 332 BCE, and the subsequent periods of foreign rule, Persian, Ptolemaic, Greek, and Roman, saw further adaptations. While core beliefs in the afterlife persisted, practices sometimes integrated foreign elements or became more conservative, clinging to tradition in the face of external influence. Mummification techniques varied in quality, sometimes becoming less meticulous due to economic constraints or a shift in focus. Coffin styles changed, reflecting new artistic trends. The proliferation of cheaper funerary texts, sometimes mass-produced, made access to spells even wider. Animal mummies, particularly as offerings to gods, became increasingly prevalent. Imagine the blend of cultures, Greek and Roman styles subtly influencing Egyptian funerary art, yet the fundamental iconography of Osiris, Anubis, and Maat remaining dominant, a testament to the enduring power of Egyptian belief. The Ptolemaic dynasty, while ethnically Greek, strategically adopted many pharaonic traditions, including elaborate mummification and tomb construction to legitimize their rule. A fascinating cultural fusion, the ultimate Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE marked the final end of native pharaonic rule, but not the end of Egyptian death practices. Mummification continued for several centuries under Roman dominion, often incorporating Roman portraiture, the famous Fayum mummy portraits, onto traditional linen wrappings, creating a unique hybrid. However, the spiritual impetus gradually waned, replaced by new religious influences like Christianity. By the 4th century CE, as Christianity gained dominance, mummification eventually died out, replaced by Christian burial practices. Imagine the gradual fading of a 3,000-year-old tradition, as new faiths offered different visions of eternity. Thus, the sands of belief shifted, but the river of hope for an afterlife flowed continuously through ancient Egyptian civilization. From the royal prerogative of the Old Kingdom to the widespread aspirations of later eras, the evolution of death practices reflects a profound cultural journey, adapting, democratizing, and persisting, a testament to humanity's enduring quest for meaning and immortality in the face of life's ultimate certainty. You see, the Egyptians didn't just die, they meticulously prepared for their next great adventure, shaping their rituals and beliefs across millennia to ensure their place in forever. For the ancient Egyptians, life was lived not merely in the present, but perpetually in the shadow and often the light of eternity. Imagine, if you will, a profound psychological landscape where every action, every decision, every aspiration was viewed through the prism of what lay beyond death. This wasn't a morbid obsession. It was an ingrained philosophical and practical orientation that shaped their daily existence, their moral code, and their very understanding of purpose. The constant focus on preparing for the afterlife created both immense anxiety and profound comfort, a unique psychological burden and blessing that permeated all levels of society. The most obvious psychological impact was the immense anxiety surrounding the fate of one's soul. The journey through Duat was perilous, and the weighing of the heart was the ultimate, inescapable test of one's righteousness. Imagine the constant self-scrutiny, the conscious effort to live in accordance with Ma'at, to speak truth, act justly, and maintain balance, not just for earthly harmony, but for eternal salvation. Every lie, every theft, every act of unkindness could potentially tip the scales against you, leading to spiritual annihilation by Amit. This fear of the second death, the complete erasure of one's existence, was arguably more potent than the fear of physical death itself. It wasn't enough to die. One had to die justified. This belief system provided a powerful moral compass, an internal regulator of behavior driven by the highest stakes imaginable. Imagine an Egyptian at the end of their life, reflecting on their deeds, hoping they had accrued enough good to balance the feather of Ma'at. Conversely, this deeply structured belief system also offered immense comfort and a sense of purpose. In a world where life was often harsh and unpredictable, the promise of a glorious, perfected afterlife provided profound hope. Imagine the solace derived from knowing that death was not an ending, but a transition to a more beautiful, effortless existence in the field of reeds. This belief mitigated the fear of the unknown, transforming it into a meticulously planned journey. The meticulous preparations, the mummification, the tomb, the grave goods, the funerary texts, were not just rituals. They were acts of love and reassurance for both the deceased and the living. The family performing these duties felt they were actively securing their loved one's eternal well-being, providing a tangible way to process grief and maintain connection. This structure, this predictable pathway to eternity, offered psychological stability in the face of life's ultimate uncertainty. The economic and social pressures created by this afterlife focus were enormous. For the elite, the construction of their tombs, the commissioning of exquisite grave goods, and the maintenance of their mortuary cults consumed vast resources throughout their lives. Imagine a noble accumulating wealth not just for earthly comfort, but for the almost more important purpose of investing in their eternal future. This fueled a significant industry, providing employment for countless artisans and laborers but it also diverted immense resources from other societal needs. For commoners, even a simple burial and basic mummification represented a significant financial burden, often requiring years of savings or collective family effort. The social expectation to provide a proper farewell was immense, lest the deceased's soul be troubled or bring misfortune upon the living. Imagine a family making sacrifices in life to ensure a dignified, effective passage for their departed. A profound act of familial devotion. Art and architecture played a crucial role in normalizing death and integrating it into the fabric of society. The ubiquitous presence of tombs, obelisks, and mortuary temples on the landscape served as constant reminders of the eternal realm. Wall paintings depicting idealized afterlives, scenes of the weighing of the heart, and the journey through Duat were not grim. They were reassuring, providing visual maps and affirmations of what awaited. Imagine walking past a tomb every day, seeing vibrant scenes of a bountiful afterlife, internalizing the promise of eternal peace and plenty. This constant visual reinforcement demystified death, making it a familiar, even beautiful, part of the cosmic cycle rather than a terrifying void. Death was not hidden. It was celebrated as a prelude to something greater. The ongoing relationship with the dead, through ancestor worship and mortuary cults, also had significant psychological implications. The belief that ancestors could intercede with the gods, offer blessings, or, if neglected, cause misfortune, maintained a powerful sense of familial and communal obligation. Imagine a living Egyptian appealing to their departed parents for help with a difficult harvest or a legal dispute, feeling a palpable, active connection to the spirits of their lineage. This connection provided a sense of continuity, belonging, and wisdom that transcended mortal lifespans, integrating generations into an enduring spiritual tapestry. It also meant that the departed were not truly gone. They simply existed in a different, albeit invisible realm, still part of the family unit. In essence, the ancient Egyptians lived with a profound awareness of their mortality, yet simultaneously embraced an unshakable faith in immortality. This duality shaped their psychological world, instilling both a disciplined moral code driven by eternal consequences and a hopeful resilience in the face of earthly hardship. Life was a finite opportunity to prepare for an infinite existence, making every moment, every deed count. This psychological burden, the relentless preparation, the moral scrutiny, the financial investment, was tempered by the profound comfort of a meticulously mapped eternity. You see, the ancient Egyptians did not merely die, they engineered their very being for a future that stretched beyond the bounds of human comprehension, finding peace and purpose in the relentless shadow and ultimately the radiant light of forever. Segment 15, Unearthing the Past. Modern archaeology and the secrets of death. Thousands of years after the last pharaoh was interred and the final mortuary priest performed his rites, the secrets of ancient Egyptian death practices continue to unfold, meticulously unearthed and painstakingly interpreted by modern archaeology and cutting-edge science. Imagine, if you will, the extraordinary dialogue between the silent remnants of a lost civilization and the innovative tools of the 21st century, revealing layers of understanding that the ancient Egyptians themselves could scarcely have conceived. This ongoing quest is not just about recovering artifacts. It is about resurrecting beliefs, understanding human vulnerability, and piecing together the intricate tapestry of a civilization's deepest hopes and fears.